So it is currently a new week and I'm hoping to weekly vlog this week, so we'll see if that ends up happening. It is Monday and it is 12 o'clock. I did get a little bit of work done this morning. I've started on a couple hand sewing heavy projects, so I sewed a dozen or so eyelets, and it's actually the first time I've done any hand sewing in 3 weeks, I want to say, because I spent most of February editing, so my fingers are completely raw and it is time to move on to something that doesn't require as much hand sewing, at least for the next couple of hours. So I'm going to do a plan for this week and figure out the things I want to accomplish. I'm also going to make the pattern for the lining for a project I'm currently working on, since the lining is cut differently than the outer fabric since it is heavily boned. So that's what I'm doing now, and I was just going to film it, but I found out that all of my memory cards were full. So I've just spent the past half hour emptying them off, and this camera, or this memory card, has 292 minutes, which will hopefully be enough for today. So let's get to making the to-do list, then we'll get to making the pattern, and then we'll figure out what I'm doing from there. If you've been around a while, then you might know that 1630s is pretty much my favorite period for fashion, and I haven't done a lot from that period. I think I put too much pressure on myself since I like the garments so much, and it's also not a very well-researched period, so it's not like the 18th century where there's this huge amount of information and patterns and advice and construction notes and bodices and etc. There's just so much out there. There isn't really that amount of knowledge and information regarding the 17th century costumes, so that makes it a little bit more difficult to sew from, since you have to make more up, or you have to research significantly harder, or some sort of combination of the two. But I'm basing one of them off of Hollar's work from the 1640s. So these are etchings that show some more casual garments. I don't want to say casual, but not evening costumes at least, which is what I'm interested in making. I'm going to try and make this entirely out of materials in my stash, though I am changing up the design a little bit since so little is visible. I'm definitely using this as a basis. I also want to make an evening costume out of a blue taffeta that I have, so I've been using references from this book, which is, oh, look at that cover, that's super helpful, which is Costume of the Western World. And this is what the structural lining for this bodice looks like. So I'm using that as a bit of guide. I draped my pattern and then I transferred it to paper, and then I did a mock-up, and then I made alterations. So now I have the pattern for the outer fabric done. And as you can tell, I'm scalloping the edges, which is probably going to make me hate myself. The lining is going to stop here. The lining is what I have to work on first. So I'm going to redraft a separate pattern for the lining that will have this lower portion cut off and won't have as large of seam allowances. So that's what I'm currently up to, and I'm going to film some of the process and then speed it up really fast for you. So that is done. Now it is time to charge you while I transfer all of these markings onto the lining fabric. Okay, so I ended up getting the lining drawn out on paper, as you guys saw, and then while the camera was charging, I went ahead and cut the pieces out and marked all of the boning channels onto the various pieces, and then I just finished sewing all of the boning channels into the 2 layers that will make up the lining. Also, these ones at front are going to be lacing panels, so I'm going to sew eyelets in next to these and then bind the edges with bias binding. But so far, so good. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these out. As you can see, I left some excess material on the ends just to make it easier to sew the boning channels. So I'm going to cut that off so all the pieces are the right size. And then I think I'm going to set this aside and get to work on a Sewing Through the Decades project. But we shall have to see how I feel once I'm done with that. I might go ahead and get the boning added to these. We'll see. Even though it is my least favorite step by far, I think I'm going to go ahead and add the boning to these pieces. So I just have the 1/4 inch plastic boning, which I use. I can leave a link to it down below. It comes in really big spools. And then I also have some scissors to cut it, as well as this little sandpaper thing to take care of the edges. Oh, and I need a marker for this too. Cutting boning, or adding bonings to something, is probably my least favorite part of the process. I just feel like it's really kind of abrasive on my hands, and I just don't enjoy it. With the plastic boning, it's a lot better, but with the metal stuff where you have to sand it and tip it, it's just such a pain. I really don't love it, but it's good to get it out of the way, and then I can move on to more fun stuff in a little bit. Hello everyone, and welcome to a new day. So yesterday was pretty productive for me. I can't remember how much I filmed, but I ended up getting the lining drafted and cut out and all the boning channels sewn, and then I also inserted all of the boning and bound the edges with some lace binding. I did a quick fitting with this and it looks pretty good so far, so I'm feeling comfortable moving on to cutting out the top layer fabric, which I also got done yesterday. So it's roughly cut out over here. Now, as you can tell by the bottom of these pieces, I wanted to finish the bottom edges with scallops, which is very very common during this period. So I created a little template and then I drew out the scallop shape onto my fabric, and then I traced around the bottom edge of this onto the fabric, and I left a little bit of material beyond this just to make it easier to sew the scallops, and then I trimmed the excess material away from the scallops and turned it right side out, which looks like this. And these look way too sharp and pointy. This is kind of the shape I was going for, just a more subtle rounded one, but these ones look like torpedo boobs from the 50s. Like, that is just not what I want at all. So I think this is a fail. There were also a couple points where I trimmed too closely and ended up digging into the fabric. So I think I'm going to turn this right side out, play around a little bit by stitching some of these to be more shallow and more curved, and see if I can get a result that I like better. And then I may end up having to retrace out all of these scallops onto the pattern before doing any more of these. I'm not sure how much of that made sense. Hopefully it'll make more sense as I do it. Basically, I don't like the shape of these. I'm going to play around, see if I can get them shaped better. And then if I can, I'm going to transfer that shape onto all of my pattern pieces. You got me? So I'm probably going to do this off camera just because it'll be hard to film, but I will definitely show you my results when I'm done. However, this isn't going to be my primary project for today. I want to make the mock-up for the 1930s Sewing Through the Decades project, and I also have a bunch of eyelets to sew on the black 1630s piece, which you guys haven't seen yet. It's based off of this fashion plate in particular, and I believe the bodice for this requires 54 eyelets, and I haven't sewn eyelets in literal months, so my fingers are killing me, but I have about 35 of them done, I think, and hopefully I can finish the rest up today. Right, so I managed to get this fixed. The top one is what the points looked like initially, and this is the altered points. As you can see, they're a lot softer. I know there are a couple puckers there, but I'm not too bothered by that. You can actually see puckers around the scallops in some paintings from this period too, so that's fairly common, and I think I'm going to put a little pearl or gem there that will cover it up. So I've gone ahead and made this alteration onto all of my pattern pieces, which is what these little crescent moons are. So I just took about a 1/4 inch off the very top of the scallops to make them a little bit less deep and a lot softer looking. So now I'm going to repeat this process with all of the panels that I cut out, as well as recut out this bodice panel, since obviously this one is unsalvageable. I don't think I'm going to sew all the scallops in the next couple of hours, but I will get them marked out so I can do it later tonight. And I think I'm going to switch focus onto the 1930s project soon, but we'll see how this goes. I'm not like super hyped up to work on that, so we'll just have to see how the day takes us. So it is currently 8 o'clock on a Sunday, and I've just decided to get started on some new pieces. It's March 11th, which means Easter is coming up, and I really want to make a couple pastel Eastery inspired pieces, and I purchased some really great fabrics with that in mind. And I thought I would get started on one of those pieces right now and share the process of making it with all of you. Hopefully in this video we will construct a blouse, a skirt, and a dress. That might be a little bit ambitious since I only have a day or two to contribute to this project, but I'm going to try and make a bunch of progress on the skirt tonight, and I will show you how it goes. So here's the skirt fabric that I purchased. It was from the Easter collection at Joann's, and I absolutely love it. It's covered with little bunnies that are peeking out of this beautiful floral pattern, and I love the colors in this. I'm planning on making a skirt out of this, and then I'll be able to pair the skirt with blue and white and yellow and pink and purple and peach and all of those wonderful colors. So I think this is going to be a really fun piece to make, a relatively simple piece to make, as well as a good addition to my wardrobe just in general. I'm not sure if you can tell, but this is printed straight on the fabric's grain line, which means I really can't cut into it too much without distorting the print and cutting into the bunnies. So I think I'm going to turn this into a rectangle skirt, a very full rectangle skirt with a relatively narrow waistband and belt loops. So that is the plan. I do have a tutorial on making a rectangle skirt, which I will link on screen, but I'll show you bits and pieces of the process tonight too. But first, I have a little bit of tidying to do since I need this table surface and I need it clean. It is still super messy in here, but I've moved the mess around, so I now have a clear working space. So I have pre-washed this fabric in case you couldn't tell based off of the selvage. So now I'm going to figure out how long I want the skirt to be, as well as how wide I want the waistband to be. So I've done the math. I figured out how long I want it to be and how long I actually have to cut the panels to be to provide enough seam allowance and room for the hem. So these skirt panels are going to be 30.5 inches long, and the waistband is going to be cut to be 31 inches wide and 3.5 inches high. And then it will be folded in half, and there's certain allowances at the back to allow for the zipper and such. So that is where I'm currently at, and now I can go ahead and start cutting stuff out. I was really hoping I'd have enough of this left over to make a pair of shorts or a blouse or something in addition to the skirt, but I'm not sure if I will. I think I want to cut out 3 panels to create the skirt, and after that I don't think there'll be much left, but let's hope for the best, shall we? Also, I'm sorry if my hands look really red and scaly. they are. I have eczema and it has not been kind to me today. I was hand washing some clothing and I think I'm allergic to one of the wool fibers in the clothing and it did not agree with me. So sorry about that. I just decapitated several bunnies. I'm very sorry, Mr. Bunny. So unless I end up making a very tiny bra top, I don't think I'm gonna have enough left to make an additional piece for this project, which sort of stinks, but I do have a lot of cute blouses already in my collection that I can pair this with. So I guess it isn't the end of the world, it's just a little bit sad. So now I'm gonna go ahead and cut out the waistband, and I'm gonna try and fussy cut it so it looks relatively pretty. So do you think I should try and get the bunnies placed on the waistband, or try and get the flowers placed on the waistband? Because I feel like having little bunny heads stick out might be a little bit morbid. So I didn't have enough to really fussy cut it out, so we're gonna see a couple little pairs of ears sticking out above the waistband. Hopefully it won't look too bad. We're just working with what we've got here. I'm thinking though it might be cute to have contrasting, or not contrasting, I guess just a different material to do the belt loops. I'm not sure if that would look bad or not, but I think that's a cute idea, and this has so many colors in it, it would be really fun to highlight one of them with a little bit of contrast. So I might look through my stash and see if I have anything that would work well for that. So I think I'm going to use a little bit of this 1930s print to make the belt loops. So I'm just going to cut off a bias cut strip, then I will sew that into tubes, which will become the belt loops. And I would like my belt loops to be 1/3 of an inch wide. And they're going to be folded in half, which means we are cutting them to be 1 2/3 inches. Yay! So now I'm just going to fold these guys in half and sew across this edge. Can you see where I just put all of the mess that was originally on this table? Hint, I put it on that table. Anyway, I can fix that by moving it out of frame. So this is where we are now. That took longer than it should have since I had to make new bobbins and re-thread the needle about 5 times, but we got it done. So now I have all of these skirt panels sewn together, and I'm going to go ahead and trim off most of the seam allowance, making sure I get rid of all of the selvage. And then I'm going to iron the pieces so the right sides are facing each other, and I'm going to sew it again to create French seams. I also went ahead and sewed the belt loops, or rather the strips of bias binding together to eventually form belt loops. So now I'm going to trim off the excess here and turn these the right way out. And that should keep me busy for the next 5 or so minutes. My camera is telling me that it needs to be charged, which is very annoying because it hasn't been on for that long, but I went ahead and did the French seams, or rather the side seams for the skirt up, and I got them ironed. So now I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is doing the final seam, which will be the back seam, as well as marking and sewing the hem. Alright, so it's been a little while, and this is where I currently am at. So I went ahead and sewed up the back seam, which you can kind of see here. I just hemmed both edges and then overlapped them and top stitched them together. I left the upper portion open, which allows me to get the skirt on and off, and then I sewed in steps so I can close up this top edge and you won't get a peek of my petticoat. I also hemmed the bottom edge, and I did this just by turning the bottom edge inward by 1/2 inch and sewing it down, and then marking a line 4 inches away from the hem and turning the hem up so it touched that line, and then I just top stitched as close to the edge as I could to create an even line of stitches 2 inches away from the bottom edge of the skirt. So that is where we are currently at, and I also got the belt loop sewn onto the waistband. I kind of regret making them a contrasting fabric, but it's going to be fine. I think the seam allowance will mean you only see about that much of the waistband, so even though they are contrasting, it's not going to be super visible since so little of it is visible. Does that make sense? Anyway, now I'm going to go ahead and gather the top edge down so it matches the top measurement of the waistband, and I will show you what it looks like while I do that. Alright, so I went ahead and gathered the top edge and got it sewn onto the waistband, and now I just need to bind the raw edge, add another closure at the waistband, and top stitch this portion down, and then it will be done. So that is honestly probably 10 minutes of work. It won't take me very long at all, but it's not going to happen tonight because I'm quite tired and my battery is running low and my laptop battery is running out. So I think I'm going to call it quits for tonight and finish this up tomorrow morning, and I will talk to you guys then. Look at my sewing room. It's been about 2 weeks since I picked up the camera, and probably a week since I've actively worked in here. Just between trying to get my Patreon launched and then dealing with the launch itself that went incredibly well. I am seriously so grateful and overwhelmed by the support I've received on there. But there was a lot of back-end stuff that had to be done. So I've been working on that. I've been editing videos. And then my dog got sick. She bulged a disc in her back while I was away. So she's been on bed rest, and the medication has been making her feel bad, and she's been really clingy, and it's just been difficult to work between worry for that and taking care of her and just general stress and anxiety. But I'm going to try and keep up with everything, and I'm going to try and get back to work because it's ridiculous that I haven't done much sewing for the last week and a half. So I'm going to try and finish up this blue project here and get started on something new, and then I can move forward with some of the Sewing Through the Decades projects. But first I have to do some cleaning up. I don't know if you'll be able to tell, but there's a drawer over there, and there's stuff sticking out of the drawers, which drives me absolutely crazy. So I'm going to try and organize that unit a little bit and make room for these materials, as well as these materials, which are mostly for videos that I plan on making in the future, but they need to find a temporary home in that unit. So I'm going to try and do that, and then I will work on this blue 17th century piece. Also, how cool is this fabric? It has little octopus on it, as well as being a floral material, and I love it so much. Don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I really love it. What else do I have here? This is all for a Victorian blouse I've been working on. These just came in the mail yesterday. They are printouts from the catalogs of my new pattern, which is super cool, and I just saw this in person yesterday too. So I can finally go ahead and do the announcement video just as soon as I get the actual costume back. And I'm going to be doing a video on making a chemise as well as making this headpiece. So that'll be fun. And then I actually went in search of those fabrics at Joann's yesterday, and nothing I wanted was on sale. So that was sort of a bummer. But I did get some buttons, which I can show you later. Here is the pattern itself. And this one goes from a size 14 to 22, which I'm really happy about. I know a lot of you guys wanted larger sizes for things, and there's a larger size for this, which is great. Also, I just realized I skipped over the coolest thing that was on my desk. These are all newspapers and magazines from 1939 that have to do with the coronation. So it has pictures of the coronation as well as the king visiting Canada, because that's where these papers are from. So there's just so many cool ads in here, as well as inspiration for 1930s and 40s fashion. I really enjoyed looking through these, and I actually have even more downstairs. These were all things that my great-grandma collected and saved for her daughters. And now they're passed on to me, which is really, really cool. So I've had books on these, trying to flatten them out, so I haven't had a chance to read through all of them just yet. But what I have read through is really, really cool. So maybe I'll do a video on these at some point if you guys would be interested. I know I've gotten a lot of requests to make some of the outfits from The Crown, and I feel like this would be the ultimate inspiration behind that. So maybe that would be fun to look through all of them and pick some designs that I could recreate or at least be inspired by. And though these ones are from 1939, I do have a whole bunch from Queen Elizabeth's coronation as well, which are really beautiful. So lots of cool stuff. And things that I'm very grateful to have in my collection. I don't know where these are going to go though, so maybe I can find a home for them while I do the rest of the cleaning up. Look, I cleaned. I'm not sure if you can tell, but I actually vacuumed last night, and I'm very, very proud of myself. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you the floor before I mess it up with threads, which is probably going to happen momentarily. I did try and film a few clips yesterday, but it sort of fizzled out, and that was before I cleaned up my sewing room. So I might insert that now. And now we are back to the present. So it is currently Saturday morning, and I'm really hoping to finish up this blue project today. I said that there was an issue with the stomacher yesterday, that it looks quite puckered when it is worn. It looks a little bit puckered now too. So what I did was I ended up just whip stitching some of the excess fabric to the side right up against the hook closures, but I'm not sure how this is going to look once it's worn, if that puckering will still be visible or present. I think it's still going to be present down lower, but hopefully it won't be on the body of the garment. Looking at extant examples or paintings from this period, you do see puckers at the front and the sides of the bodice, so I don't think it's necessarily inaccurate, it just doesn't look particularly good. So I think I'm going to go ahead and finish up the skirt, and then I can try it on all together. If I'm still unhappy with the bodice, then I will hopefully have enough fabric left over to recut the stomacher and to redo that. That's going to be a lot of work though, since I have to redo all the beading and trim. But if it improves the overall look of it, then I am prepared to do it. But for right now, I'm working on these skirts. I went ahead and got my petticoat out, and for a while now I've been wondering where all my safety pins have gone, because I have this empty spice jar that is usually full with safety pins, And it turns out they were all in this petticoat. I used them to temporarily secure Pentax so I could photograph a shorter dress over top of this petticoat, but I never took them out. So that's where they were all hiding. But it is back down to its full length, and I'm going to go ahead and take the measurements necessary to cut the skirt. I don't have a ton of fabric left over, but hopefully I'll have enough to get the amount of volume that I want. Luckily, this bodice hangs over the top edge of the skirt, so I don't have to worry about making that look pretty like I did on the orange 17th century costume that I made. I am thinking that I want to sew the hem with scallops, which is going to be quite tedious and annoying, but I think it's going to really add to the overall look of the garment. So I'm going to try and do that, and hopefully I'll be able to get it done today, but we shall see. First step is putting these safety pins away. And then I shall take the measurements and go ahead and get to work. So I just cut off the top of this, so now it will hopefully be close to the right length once the top edge is gathered down. But before doing any gathering, I'm going to do the scalloped hem. So now I have to go through and draw the scallop pattern onto the bottom edge of this material, and then I have to face that with these strips of silk that I cut off from the top and actually sew and iron all of the scallops, which is probably going to take me about 2 hours, but if I could do it faster than that, that would be awesome. So all of the scallops have been sewn. They're not all done perfectly. I tried so hard to get them perfect on the bodice, and I think I was just a little bit fed up by the time I reached the skirt, but I did, I think, a pretty okay job. So what I have to do now is trim off this excess, basically trim the seam allowance down to 1/4 inch, and then clip into the corners, and also remove the stitch from the top of the corners so they turn out smoothly, and that's going to take me a while. So I think I'm going to get lunch first, and then I will come back up and go ahead and do that. Also, look how handy this is. This originally went underneath my desk, and it's on wheels, so I can roll it out from its little home there over here to help give me extra space when I'm sewing. So very cool. And yeah, I'm happy that I managed to get this part of the process done, but it's the next step that I really hate because it's just so tedious turning them out and ironing them all so they look nice. But I will do it, and I will get it done today. So I went ahead and got the bottom edge trimmed down. So now everything is ready to be turned right side out. Just by the way, I managed to cut this all off in one piece, and I'm very proud of myself. I have that weird sort of satisfaction that you get when you're peeling an apple. You manage to keep the peel continuous throughout the entire thing. I don't know. I'm probably just going to throw this out, but there's something very satisfying about this to me. I'm also excited because some of the stuff for my Patreon rewards arrived today. I'm still waiting on the prints, and then I can get everything mailed out. But like how cute this packaging is. So these are big enough to send off the swatch cards as well as the prints. But what I am here to show you is how I do these scallops for this. So I have kind of a weird, not super durable, but very pretty and easy way of doing this that I thought I would share with you, and the finished scallops look like this. So I think they're really pretty nice and clean. They look much better when you use a thicker fabric because you don't see any discrepancies in the stitching that make these look boxy. Like if you're working with a flannel or a suiting of any sort, it'll cover that just with the natural thickness of the material. But we're working with a very fine silk, so we don't have that luxury. But let me go ahead and just show you how I do this. I apologize for the weird angle. I'm working on getting a tripod that will hopefully make this look much cleaner. But anyway, this is what the scallops look like after being sewn and just loosely turned the right way out. So by loosely, I mean I've just pressed this the right way out using my finger. I haven't used a tool to try and smooth out the edges or anything like that. So after doing this, the first thing I'm going to do is take my seam ripper and actually remove a stitch from between each scallop. I don't think this camera is going to focus on it, but I will insert a photo of what I'm talking about. There's a little stitch that you can see right here, and that takes place between each of the scallops, and I'm just going to go ahead and use my seam ripper to remove that. And I have clipped the corners of this, but I haven't clipped super close to the edge since I don't want it to fray when I do this. So you just go ahead and remove that single stitch. And instantly when this is laid out, you should notice it being flat as opposed to having puckers in between it. So this is part that I haven't done. You can see the puckers. This is one part where I have, and the puckers are gone. So after doing that, I'm going to take this little tool, and this is made for turning corners right side out. So it has a blunt curved edge, which works really well for this, but you don't necessarily need a fancy tool. And from the back side, I'm going to go ahead and just use this tool to press the seam outward so it takes on the scallop shape, or so it defines the scallop shape, and then I'm immediately going to iron over top. Just like that. And then we'll repeat this process.
And I'm doing this one at a time because it doesn't seem to hold the scallop shape very perfectly until you iron over top of it. So you have to be kind of quick, and you also want to check regularly and make sure it looks good from both sides, not just the back side, since that's not the side you're going to see when the garment is finished. So just pressing it out, immediately ironing over top. And doing this on the skirt I've actually found to be pretty easy. When I was working on the bodice and the pieces were almost completely fully lined, you didn't have nearly as much access to push the scallops out, so it was very fiddly and annoying. But so far this has been going pretty well, though I definitely have a long way to go. That is the finished scallops versus the unfinished scallops. So now I'm going to go ahead and repeat this a whole bunch of times. I was just gonna give you guys an update, and then I heard chirping, and a flock of blackbirds is here. This is a pretty normal occurrence where I live, but it's still kind of funny. I had a pretty exciting mail day, and I thought I would open some of these things up on camera. The first thing, I believe, is the P.O. Box stamp that I purchased. So I don't have to write out my return address on all of the Patreon rewards. I can just use a stamp. Look at how cute that is. It is really excessive, but it is basically a unicorn with the P.O. Box address inside of it. And I saw these and I thought they were absolutely adorable, and I knew that's what I wanted to get. It's just the perfect amount of whimsy mixed with practical. Also, this is my P.O. Box address. I don't really advertise it. I mostly have it for business reasons. But if you're interested, it is P.O. Box 1042, Manorville, New York 11949. And it can be addressed to Angela Costumery or Angela Clayton. Anyway, that is exciting, thing number one. And then let's also go ahead and open this up. So I'm fairly confident this is a 1950s evening gown pattern, which is what people on Patreon voted for me to make as a bonus project. Wow, I thought it would be a standard size pattern, but that is huge. Wow, I was not expecting that. That is massive. So this is the Vogue pattern 191, and it is complete. I also got this huge box in the mail from Moo, and these are the next 8 months worth of prints for my Patreon, as well as some stickers, because I thought those were cute. So I ordered a huge assortment, and I think I ordered 1,000 prints in total, which is way more than I needed. I really only wanted to order 100, but when you order smaller quantities, they're like $1.20 each, and when you order bigger quantities, they're like 20 cents each. So I decided to just spend a lot up front and get enough for several months, and that's what I've done. But annoyingly, even though they all come in these cute little boxes, they aren't sorted into these boxes by the different prints. So I ordered like 20 different prints in a pack of 1,000, but they didn't sort them into boxes where each 50 are grouped together. So I think I'm going to go ahead and get that done today, and probably also get the letters labeled for Patreon now that I have my stamp and stuff. I have all of them sorted into their piles. It's so weird how they arranged them like that. By weird, I mean annoying. I don't know why they weren't organized into the boxes to begin with, but whatever, they're all sorted. At least they're sorted by costume. So now I have to go through and separate the different photos for each costume that I got, and then each separate photo will have its own box. So this is the dress. Isn't it beautiful? I went ahead and remade the stomacher. So I think in the last clip I was talking about how I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, and I was complaining about how there were wrinkles across the front when I wore it, and some of those wrinkles were on the side panels, but some of them were on the front panel too, because there was just too much fabric. I had bag lined the stomacher the first time around, and that just made it quite pardon the pun, baggy, and it just did not look good. So over here you can see the remnants of that first attempt. I ended up cutting this apart and using it as a guide for not only the size of the next one, but also for the placement of the beading and the hooks and bars, and that's why I have the sides of it cut out, as well as all of these things marked. So I used that as a guide to recut this, and this time around I cut it from denim instead of a lighter material, and I added a little bit more boning, and then I finished the edge by turning it inward as opposed to bag lining, so I could get the top layer fabric really taut over the boning. And I've also bound the sides so it looks a little bit prettier, since for this one I ended up having to cut a lot off that I wasn't expecting to, so it wasn't finished as nicely. Then I got it re-sewn on, got all the hooks done. I ended up changing the beading design a little bit, and I think it looks way nicer this time around. And I used a different lace too. This lace isn't as historically accurate. This is kind of passable for silver work embroidery, which was done during the time, whereas Elancon lace was not. But since the color of the stones is already historically inaccurate, I decided to just say screw it and use the more elaborate, less accurate lace as well. And I'm happy that I did because I think it looks really stunning. The interior isn't the prettiest that I've ever made. I had so much trouble with these sleeves, and this fabric is just so prone to showing puckers. So when I originally sewed the sleeves on, attaching it to this edge, there was just so much puckering and you could see all the stitches and it looked really bad. So instead of sewing these sleeves to the edge of the top layer fabric, I just whip stitched them to the lining. So it looks pretty rough from the inside and it doesn't look great from the outside, but when it's worn and there's more tension on it, it looks a lot nicer. So that's it for the sleeves. And then I sewed the skirt on, so I just gathered it down by machine, and then I top stitched ribbon to the back side of it and whip stitched the ribbon to the lining. And then it is also whip stitched to these front panels. So that keeps it closed in the center, and then the stomacher hooks over top. So that is pretty much it. Actually, I'm not sure if I showed you this part, but I got all of these scallops done, and then I whip stitched the top edge of the lining in by hand. So that is what I'm working with the dress, and it is now complete. I do want to do a final fitting with it, but I'm pretty sure that it is done. And now I have to work on the chemise that goes underneath. So I made this chemise a couple years back for a Christmas project that I never ended up finishing. I think I paired it with a Christmas crown though, and if I can find a photo of that, I will show it on screen here. And when I originally made this, I also had ruffles for the sleeves, but I thought these sleeves were already quite large and the ruffles didn't add much to them. But I want to wear this underneath the blue shantung, and though the sleeves add a really nice amount of volume to the sleeves of the blue dress, you can't actually see them since they're too short. So my goal was to find the ruffles that I was originally supposed to attach to this that I didn't end up attaching and get those sewn on. So I'm happy to report that I actually managed to locate the ruffles in one of my unfinished costume bins, which I was shocked at since, as I said, I finished this, or kind of finished it 2 years ago, so I wasn't expecting to be able to find the missing pieces. But I did, so now I just have to get those down and then I can whip stitch them on. I should also probably hem this because I never got around to doing that either. And this is a very odd piece. It's made out of this really pretty embroidered, I think it was a tablecloth mesh, but it's a very soft embroidered mesh, and then I lined it with chiffon, and then the sleeves are actually lined with petticoat net, so they have a lot of structure to them and give a lot of volume. I didn't think it through very well though because the mesh is on the inside, so they're quite scratchy as well. What I should have done is had the embroidered layer on top and then the petticoat net and then the chiffon underneath, so it'd be nice and soft on my arms, but I didn't do that. So yeah, and it has a really pretty ruffle around the neckline. I haven't decided if I want this ruffle to be tucked in to the neckline of the overdress or flared out, but I can decide that later. I also have all of this stuff to put away since I finished the blue dress. So I might go ahead and show you my beading bins if you're interested, because you guys liked seeing the button bins, so maybe you'll like this one too. Oh, and over here, you will probably have seen this by now, but my Renaissance dress came back home. So this was living at McCall's, so they could turn it into a pattern, but now the pattern is out and I asked to have it back so I could film a video in it for a costume spotlight. So that arrived home and I have photographed it again and taken some footage of it, and the costume spotlight will already be up by the time this video goes up, I'm sure. But what I wanted to show you is this big bin is for unfinished or abandoned projects, and I actually want to make a video all about my unfinished and abandoned projects because I think it would be interesting. And then on top I have some of the mock-ups from the Sewing Through the Decades video. But I or videos. There are quite a lot of them, but that's what I need to get out. So I'm hoping I can just lift the lid of the bin and slip them out, but there is a serger on top of that, so it's quite heavy and it might not end up working, but we shall see. I might leave the camera on but not set up so you can hear my shouts of triumph or pain if this ends up falling down. Also, before I forget, I wanted to mention that my nail polish color is identical to the color of the heads of these pins. Can we just take a moment to appreciate how similar in color these are? I think this nail polish color is called Sunflowers, but it totally should be called Pinhead Yellow. Also, my nails and hands are in rough shape right now. I broke a whole bunch of nails and I'm still having eczema problems, especially with all of the stress from this week. It's really causing it to flare up. And the problem my dog is having, there's a lot of poop and there's a lot of blood involved. So I've been cleaning her up and washing my hands probably 4 or 5 times an hour. So that hasn't helped either. But on to cheerier things. I'm going to go ahead and get those ruffles gathered and find the top edges, and then we can get them sewn on to the chemise. So it is currently 9:30 and it's time for me to go back downstairs and get some editing done. I'd really hoped to get a voiceover written tonight, but that didn't end up happening. However, I did get my sewing room tidied a little bit. As I showed you earlier, this dress is done. Now you can see it hanging up. I'm really pretty happy with how this turned out. I do have to do a final fitting. I have the petticoats and stuff for it down there. And then this is the chemise. So I showed you the ruffles that I found. I ended up regathering them, and then I whip stitched them to the hem of the puff sleeves from the interior. I didn't do it super tightly since I'm probably going to want to take these off again in the future. I do think the design of this is much cuter without the ruffles, which I realize is a ridiculous thing for me to say since I love ruffles more than most things in life. But I just think the proportions are nicer without them. But we'll see. It definitely suits this costume better with the ruffles. The only thing I didn't do is hem this, because for something like this, the layer should really be hemmed independently, but I did the seam up with them together. This is also quite short on its own, so I don't really want to take it up by a whole lot. So I'm thinking maybe I could find a lace that complements this and top stitch that over the bottom edge and then just bind the bottom edge with a really cheap seam binding. Or I can see if I have more of this color of chiffon and bind it with that and add a ruffle or something. I don't know, I'm not happy with the idea of just doing a normal hem, so I've decided to hold off on that. And obviously you won't be able to see it when this garment is worn, but I'd still like to address that at some point, especially if I do a costume spotlight on this project, since I'd like to do more of those and some of you have shown interest in that. And yeah, I'm going to call it quits for tonight.